So if you feel you're getting worked up or you're getting anxious or you yourself are feeling slighted or like you don't exist, again, the people sometimes they take over the conversation. That's one of the signs or red flags that you may be around somebody who has these narcissistic traits. So when they take over the conversation, whatever you have to say is not important. And that can be quite frustrating because it feels like you've been erased.
Mental health champions, we're diving into an area that I can help you out so much with because we don't bring a guest on specializing in this often, where he helps you navigate complex personality dynamics and he brings unique lens to conversations, which I love, blending clinical insight with relatable stories that resonate with audiences. And I have a feeling Anthony's going to go ahead and bring some of those forward today. So let me start by welcoming you, Anthony, to a mental health break.
Great. Thank you. And thank you so much for having me here and giving me this opportunity to talk about a really complicated topic.
Absolutely. And we're going to be plugging his amazing podcast along the way as well. But first,
Hmm.
everyone, welcome back to a mental health break. My name is Vincent A. Lanci, and today we're diving into someone who has a lot of passion in mental health. He's giving back not just through his podcast, he's got a video channel, all of these things that bring complex psychoanalytic ideas to life. So he makes them again relatable and they will resonate to you. So be sure to stick around to the end of the episode because you're going to figure out where you can find all of this. But thank you so much for tuning in today, keeping the show a top 5% global show. And some other areas we're going to talk about is a deep dive into narcissism, especially what is it? Can you define it? How you can recognize someone, possessing this, whether it's in a loved one, how to navigate narcissistic relationships. So, again, these are all areas he brings over 20 years of experience to help you out with. And remember, we're brought to you today by Coming Alive Podcast Production.com. And for today, Anthony, I want to set the table right. Let's go back in time. Please share your mental
Hmm.
health journey from wherever you feel comfortable.
Sure. It all started soon after graduate school. I worked in a dialysis unit. That's a facility where people go when their kidneys fail. So the treatment protocol is they have to go 3 times a week for about 4 hours, sit on this machine. It works like an artificial kidney. And there was a big segment of the population that would skip their dialysis treatments or end them early, which increases morbidity and mortality. So the staff would give them a really hard time and label them as non-compliant. So at that point, I was working on my dissertation, and I said, this would be really interesting to understand. Is this more than just non-compliant or like poor behavior? So I designed an intervention where I sat, we had a control group that got usual social work care, which is basically educating people about the consequences of missing dialysis, and then a psychodynamic treatment, which is sitting down and talking to them and trying to understand what's going on that you're missing your treatment. So at that point, I didn't realize it then, but what I was working with were personality disordered patients. And what I started to discover was it was far more pleasant being in Atlantic City and gambling. That's more exciting than being in a dialysis unit, getting yelled at by the staff, being told that you're non-compliant. So as I got closer to them, I started to understand that the non-compliance was a defensive behavior. In other words, it was compensatory. It was compensating for something else. It wasn't the problem. That's how it started. And that was so closely linked with personality disorders. That started my research and then investigating and an interest in narcissism, which is a big part of what these patients were experiencing.
And you just brought it right in from what I teased in the beginning of the show. We
Yeah.
hear that word a lot, right? Narcissism, narcissist. There's even documentaries on it as you're scrolling through the channels now. What is a narcissist, we should say? And then, of course, everyone, we're going to dive deeper into that, right? How they can recognize it in themselves or loved ones, how to
Mhm.
navigate relationships. So let's just assume, right, which we don't like to do, but assume no one's understood the word or definition
Yes.
before.
Yeah, okay, great. So, just in a very general way, there are many different ways to define narcissism. That's what makes it so complicated. But the definition that works best for me is These are individuals who have problems regulating their self-esteem. So their sense of self is very fragile. In other words, the way they look at themselves, the way they think other people are looking at them. So this is something that they need to learn to manage. And because it's fragile, they tend to depend on other people to regulate their self-esteem. In my field, this is what we call narcissistic supplies. So they're always looking for people to make them feel special, to admire them. That's why for many of these people, it's like important to be the center of attention. But at the same time, they're very prone to feeling humiliated or overseen or not paid attention to. Like I just mentioned with the dialysis patients, when they were told they were being non-compliant, they couldn't tolerate that. That's a criticism, which they're very sensitive to feeling judged, right? So instead of dealing with the criticism, they put themselves in a much more comfortable position, which is to either reverse it and attack and try to shame the staff. A lot of these patients were quite aggressive as well. They get really angry, or to retreat, which is what I think many people see today in relationships, right? Is you get into an argument with a loved one, they either become aggressive or they retreat. They ice you out. That's a common phrase that I hear. So that's it in general. I know there, like I said, many different ways to describe it, but problems regulating self-esteem and then over-reliance on getting those supplies from other people. So they're constantly looking for somebody else. And when those supplies go missing, they react with either aggression or they retreat. They have many different ways of reacting, but for time's sake, I'll say that's the best way to describe it.
I love everything you said there. Thank you
Mm.
for educating and making this easier to understand for our audience. Now, you touched on something there, those difficult conversations that can get tense with family.
Yes.
As this is airing, this is going to air here. We're a few days before Christmas here, where
Hmm.
a lot of beautiful things come with the holidays, but also many of us may be able to relate to some tenser
Yes.
conversations. Let's dive in here, Anthony.
Yeah, I'm so glad you mentioned the holidays. It's something I've been thinking about myself because, I mean, if we just think about the definition, just coming out for the holidays, if someone who's listening has a family member that they suspect has these narcissistic traits, let's say, or characteristics, so now they're coming out. They're coming out for the holidays. But when you come out and you expose yourself. And when you expose yourself, you can always end up feeling what? Humiliated, ashamed, embarrassed. So when these people come out for the holidays, they're sort of in a heightened state of awareness. They're looking for those supplies, like I mentioned. And if they don't get those supplies, there's going to be a pretty strong reaction, which is probably what a lot of people experience. When Uncle Joe comes over and he's not the center of attention. Or if you have any feedback for who's ever hosting, like let's say you're the guest, right? And you have some feedback and that feedback is not appreciated. That's something to be careful of when you're around these people. Hmm.
A lot of great points there. And everyone remember to take a deep breath. Some fresh air outside, I'm sure will be helpful. I know that's one of my mental health hacks as I do the air quotes, right? I spend some intentional time in nature or
Mm.
outside. I do intentional screen breaks because I'm only 34, but I'm really starting to see the ears and the eyes from being on the computer the whole time and with headsets. So getting out there, taking some deep breaths, taking walks. Of course, in the summer, it's a lot easier to do that. I get it. But now that I've shared some of my mental health hacks, I'd love to hear some of yours, Anthony, because I try to stress this every episode where what works for some will never work for everyone. So I'm going to already share the nature. And as we're eating a lot of great food, we'll remember to eat some healthier things in the next coming days because that's good for us. What can you offer our audience here,
No,
Anthony?
listen, it's such a good point that you raised because I think the hacks that you just gave are really valuable to get one into a more regulated state of mind. So if you feel you're getting worked up or you're getting anxious or you yourself are feeling slighted or like you don't exist, like again, the people sometimes they take over the conversation. That's one of the signs or red flags that you may be around somebody who has these narcissistic traits. So when they take over the conversation, whatever you have to say is not important. And that can be quite frustrating because it feels like you've been erased. So, yes, I think your hacks are very valuable in terms of getting yourself into a more regulated state of mind. But let's say dinner's being served and you can't go for your walk, right? And now you're forced to be sitting at the dinner table. And there are sometimes in families, there are multiple courses that come out over the course of the day. It's hard to get away. Then the question becomes, what do you do? How do you sit with somebody like this or you spend the day with them? So, at the very least, I hope that in the definition that we just gave, right, that a big part of what makes up these people is that they are trying to regulate their sense of self-esteem, that they have a very fragile sense of self. I hope that is the beginning, at least, of allowing you to step back and get into a more reflective rather than reactive state of mind, because then you could say to yourself, even though this feels very personal, it's not personal, because if Uncle Bob or whomever, mom, dad, has these characteristics, I know exactly what they're doing, right? I know that they're trying to regulate their self esteem or a fragile sense of self, or they're feeling insecure. And one way they do that, unfortunately, could be what? To devalue me. So they don't feel devalued. Now I feel devalued or unimportant. So hopefully that, just if you go by the strict definition, is enough to cool you down and put you in that more reflective state. And then you could begin to, I don't want to say have empathy for them, but at the very least, not be so reactive and get into a tug of war about who has the facts about the way the turkey should have been cooked or something along those lines.
That's
Right?
so funny. And it's, of course, as you said, you may not be able to get away. So when you're in that moment, just again, breathe, attack some of the things that he just shared. And remember, it will be over eventually. So try to make the most of it. The good things where they may not be around you the next holiday season, right? Life continues to go on, and that makes things very challenging. So, do you have any advice for someone who may be grieving, especially during these holiday seasons? I hope you're enjoying today's show as much as I am leading the discussion. Remember to subscribe to stay current on our shows.
Wait, if we could just go back for 1 second, you made me think of one more thing, because if
All
you're in
right.
that situation and you do find yourself becoming reactive, the first step is like to understand what you're up against. But if you start stepping into a role, that is something else to be mindful of, because around the holidays, like you mentioned, sometimes when we go home, I call it returning to the scene of the crime, right? In other words, you may step back into an old role that you played in the family, and
Right.
that's something else to be very mindful of too. So if you find yourself reacting or being the scapegoat or trying to fix everything so that your mother's not anxious about this, but then you have to then be very careful and say, what's going on with me? So just in my work, I don't only work with people who have these narcissistic dynamics, but I work with people who are in relationships and they're not interested in leaving for whatever reason, certain life entanglements, or they can't leave.
Mhm.
So the second thing is, if you find yourself reacting, it's really important to question, what's pulling me into this role, and why is it necessary for me to be whatever, if it's the people pleaser or the incompetent one, right? And that hopefully helps you then say, all right, this is an old role that I played. This is a script that I would play out in the family, and I might be pushed into this, but that doesn't mean I necessarily need to continue playing this role, which sounds a little easier than it actually is, because this is our family and something that we're accustomed to doing. Yeah.
Well, I mean, that's everything, though, right? It's easier said than done. And the hard part is to actually do, not say and do it. And you're a great example of putting in the work and doing it and seeing the
Yeah.
great things that come out on the other side. So, again, thank you for all you do for mental health,
Yeah, of
Anthony. And
course.
of course, we can't get too far without bringing up his awesome podcast. That's right, everyone. You're hearing about another mental health show. I want you to go ahead and look in the apps right now to go ahead and download it as he introduces the show, please.
Yeah, it's the Narcissism Decoder. It's a podcast, a video channel all about narcissism. And one thing that really distinguishes it, what I hear from the listeners, is people tend to gravitate towards the podcast who already sort of binged on other podcasts that tend to blame or victimize or accuse. They call the narcissist, they vilify them, they say they'll never change, they have no empathy. And it's not that these things aren't true per se, but these are surface level descriptions of people who suffer with these characteristics. So a lot of people come over. One thing that distinguishes it is we go deeper into like what leads somebody to behave in this way. Why do they behave in this way? How do you relate to somebody if you do decide to stay with them? And if you are actually the one suffering with these characteristics, is there hope for you? And what's necessary to heal if you're interested in healing?
Yeah, well, say someone is interested in healing, right? What's one
Yes.
of the first steps they could take to not backslide and keep moving forward?
Yeah, so here's one of the most important things that I find is tackling these things on your own. Again, this is my bias because I'm coming from a psychodynamic perspective,
Yes,
which
yes.
means that getting educated is important, but it's like the dialysis patients that I mentioned above in that research study. Education alone does not work because this is something that's deeply ingrained in one's personality. And a lot of the ways we behave, we don't even know why we're behaving that way. We know what we're doing. Sometimes we could say, I did this because my mother treated me this way, but then I keep doing it. So then that means it's more complicated. So what I would say is one of the most important things is if you could get yourself with somebody who is trained and experienced working with personality disorders, because so many people who come to me have been in treatment in and out for decades sometimes, and it doesn't put a dent in the personality part. So getting someone who's specifically trained to work with personality, in particular narcissism, is a really good first step. And you have to assume it's going to take time. The other thing that I just want to warn people about,
Mhm.
because again, if it's part of one's personality, it takes time. So going to someone for a couple of weeks or a couple of sessions or sometimes even a couple of months, yeah, you're shaking your head. I think you get it, right? It's not going to be enough.
It's just like we said before, everything's going to take time, but no one can force anyone to do anything, right? In life, as we may see friends and family doing things, you can offer advice, but if someone doesn't really want it for themselves, they're not going to go ahead and fix it, right? You could look at exercise, you could look at taking care of your
That's
mental
right.
health, everything.
Yeah.
If you don't actually want it, and think of yourself, things you actually put energy to, right? What do you actually go ahead and follow through with? Such amazing, great points. And we'll do things a little backwards. Everyone, stick around. We will get the rest of his contact info and some advice for anyone struggling. But you just talked about getting help. Do you offer help in a remote setting? How can we find you and get help from you?
Yeah, actually, I do. I work 100% remotely now since COVID,
Very
to be
cool.
honest. Yeah. And everything's on my website. So if you throw it in the show notes, that'd be great. But the podcast, the video, I put out a lot of content on these dynamics and yeah, about my private practice, everything is there.
And what's the website just to hear it?
Yeah, it's drmazzella.com.
All
Yep.
right.
Yeah.
Drmazzella. And I just wanted to plug you there while
Thank
I
you.
saw the opportunity to talk about it. And again, everyone, he's got an amazing podcast, and we're not done yet. I just want to make sure you heard it. The Narcissism Decoder. It's a podcast and video channel that brings complex psychoanalytic ideas to life. He makes them relatable, practical, and especially relevant to understanding personality disorders and relationships. So, again, thank you for all you do to bring light to this and normalize the conversation. But now I'd love to ask you to help anyone tuning in today who may be struggling, can't find a way to see the sun shine. What is some advice you can offer?
Well, the good news here, there is sort of a silver lining around that cloud that's blocking that sun, right? Which is a lot of what comprises narcissism is it's defensive. Remember, I mentioned earlier that the people have to protect themselves from feeling ashamed, humiliated, vulnerable. And we know enough now, the people who do this kind of therapy, that we can help lower those defenses. In other words, we can help address this problem. So even though you may go out there and search narcissism and see there's no hope, they don't change. Yeah, well, absolutely, they do change again if they're willing to put in the work. So the silver lining is, like most conditions, there is healing is absolutely possible for sure.
Thank you so much for that. And again, everyone, I hope we've motivated you and let you know that we're nothing special, right? We're regular folks, like just like you. But if you put in the work, you can start to see results. And I'll give a mental health tip here that I have shared. Don't focus on the big, sometimes scary end goal, right? Let's talk about manageable, small steps to gain some momentum. And I promise it's like when I go for a walk, right? If you walk for 2 minutes today, let's try 3 minutes tomorrow, right? And
Hmm.
then we'll try 4 minutes. And oh, wow, in 7 day week, we're at 7 minutes and then
Yeah,
14 minutes. And then all of a sudden in a month, you're walking for well over a half hour. So everyone believe in yourself. One more time, the name of the podcast and the website, Anthony.
it's the Narcissism Decoder, and the website is drmazzella.com.
Yes, thank you, everyone. And if you need another good show, I like to talk about his because right now, in the information age, I guess you could say, right? This digital age where there's a lot of information, but getting the right and credible information is super important. He does a great job
Mm.
at that. As you heard from his testimonial today, he has a lot of passion and expertise into this. And just like I try to on my show, bring on guests just like Anthony who really care about making a difference and using their story to help you keep moving forward. I have to ask, are you from New York?
I am actually. Yeah,
I
I'm in
it,
Manhattan.
yeah, the accent. I'm from New York as well. Originally, I went to Northport High School uh,
Oh, okay.
back
Oh,
in
nice.
not it feels like a yesterday, but wow, 15 years or so now. So I'll just moved down to Florida after graduation, and then that was it.
Oh, nice. So you're enjoying some nice weather right now, is that right?
You could say it's nice-ish. I'm a wimp with any cold weather. I like it
Uh,
to be hot. I traded my snowflakes for palm trees, and that was just the plan. I knew I was getting out of the cold, but
that's
everyone,
great. Yeah.
be
So
sure
that's
to
the way to
check.
do it. Everybody down to Florida. Be sure to
Well,
join us down there, right?
I'm not a very political guy, especially on this show. That's not what it's about. But I know New York City is dealing with a lot of changes, and in
Mm.
Florida, we're a product of those changes where we're getting a lot of people moving down
Oh,
here. And
yeah.
Connecticut, I know. But everyone, thank you for joining us here on a mental health break. Be sure to check out our guest to honor today online. He does a lot of great work for the community. As I mentioned, he's not only got a podcast audio, but it's video. It's the Narcissism Decoder. And he's got his private practice where he shared a little bit about himself to go ahead and get there. And if you want to get in touch today, Anthony at drmazzella.com. He's a great resource to have in your community as a mental health champion, not just for those 20 years he's put in, but because of how much, again, he has a passion for conversations like this. My name is Vincent A. Lanci. We're brought to you by ComingAlivePodcastProduction.com. And I hope we helped you take a deep breath today, right here on a mental health break. And we'll see you next Sunday for one more show before the new year, and that solo show will be with me. We'll talk about some New Year's mindsets, some things I'm looking forward to, some struggles and mental health challenges I faced as we get finished up in the year. And then, of course, the first episode of the year will be our amazing panel, our first mental health panel in quite some time. So we'll see you next week right here on a mental health break. Anthony, thank you for such a great job.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to another episode. I would love to hear your feedback. What did you love? What do you want to see more of? Are there any questions you would like me to ask the guests who come on the show? This show is not possible without you, the amazing listeners, so please email us at podcastsbylancy@gmail.com and let us know what you think. We'll also feature you on a later show. Please remember to subscribe to stay current with our amazing community of guests who will continue to come on the show, sprinkled in with solo episodes from me, Vincent A. Lanci. With that, I look forward to introducing more shows to you each and every week. And with that, we're signing off today. Enjoy the episodes and make it a great day ahead.